This is Les Williams from the Department of Commerce, U.S. Commercial Service. This webinar, titled Turkey, Familiarization to Export, is one of 6 country-specific webinars hosted by U.S. Commercial Service St. Louis office, giving you a general overview of doing business in each country. The St. Louis office is one of over 100 domestic offices, in addition to over 100 offices in more than 80 countries. Our mission is to help U.S. companies by providing export counseling and assist with finding qualified agents and distributors overseas. If you aren't currently working with your local U.S. Commercial Service, set up a meeting to discuss your company's goals overseas and how the organization may be able to assist. You can find us at www.export.gov. We will have 2 speakers for today's webinar, Josh Burke and John Fay, the main speaker of this event. First, we'd like to introduce Josh Burke, who is a commercial officer currently serving the St. Louis Export Assistance Center. Josh previously worked in the private sector, where he worked in the management consulting industry. He will take just a few minutes to give an overview of the commercial service itself and its benefits to the export partners. Josh.
Les, thank you so very much. Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Burke, as Les mentioned, and I am a commercial officer serving in a domestic role currently. So the U.S. has an interest in helping its businesses and its companies expand into overseas markets. It's beneficial, of course, for overall GDP, and certainly it's beneficial for jobs. And so the role of the commercial service is to do just that, as this slide shows, to protect and to promote American businesses all over the world. So the U.S. Commercial Service, we are part of the U.S. Department of Commerce and fall under the International Trade Administration umbrella. We have over 100 offices throughout the country. These are what we call the Export Assistance Centers in large metropolitan areas. And in addition to that, we have a presence in over 80 countries worldwide with over 150 offices. So within our embassies and within our consulates, we have teams of international trade specialists who are absolute experts in their particular fields and in their particular markets. And leading those folks are folks such as officers such as John Fay, who you'll hear from shortly, who will manage the team of the international trade specialists overseas. So how do we go about helping companies? We do that in 4 ways. One, through trade counseling, meeting with companies one-on-one, helping you identify, for your particular product or service, what particular market may be of interest or may be the best fit for you. We also do market intelligence and market research, more detailed information to make sure that you are selecting the right market and going into the right place at the right time for your particular product. One of our most popular services is through what we call business matchmaking. And we have one service in particular called the Gold Key Service. That's when you would, with your particular product, fly out to Turkey and meet with businesses and potential buyers, distributors, or agents one-on-one. You have a chance to meet folks, look them in the eye, shake hands, understand who you're doing business with. All of these companies would be vetted and approved by the U.S. Embassy to make sure they're not on any blacklists. And by the time you get on the plane to go home, you very well may have deals and contracts signed. It's an excellent and very popular program. And the 4th way that we go about helping companies is through what we call commercial diplomacy. If you have a large shipment that's stuck in customs for whatever reason, we may be able to help you out. If you're bidding on an international, very large international tender, the U.S. government may advocate on your behalf. So that's how commercial diplomacy tends to work. So to learn more about the U.S. Commercial Service and how we can help you and your business grow, please feel free to meet with anyone in your local Export Assistance Center in St. Louis. We are geographically easily located in the North City area, but as I mentioned, this webinar is recorded, and for anyone who's not in the St. Louis region, you can find your U.S. Export Assistance Center on our export.gov website, and you can contact them, set up a meeting, meet with us face-to-face, and we'll be sure to help you meet your goals. So that's more about us. We are real people. We are able to help you help expand your businesses. So, Les, I'll turn it back to you.
John Fay is the commercial attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, where he is responsible for assisting U.S. companies interested in exporting to Turkey. He's previously worked as an international trade specialist in Orlando's U.S. Export Assistance Center, an associate director for the Office of International Operations at the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service headquarters in Washington, D.C., for the Embassy of Australia in D.C., plus other overseas positions. Mr. Fay has a Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from James Madison University, speaks Czech, Slovak, French, and some Spanish. I'd like to thank Mr. Fay for taking the time to join us and share his expertise today. John.
Well, thank you, Les, and thanks, Josh, for the intro on CS Services. I thank you all for spending some time with me today. I very much enjoy having the opportunity to reach out to companies across the U.S. on a regular basis, just to talk about the Turkish market, because I think it's one of the markets perhaps that's more misunderstood out there, and perhaps the opportunities are less well known. I have to sort of apologize for your hold music. That was very Turkish, and it sounds like the kind of thing that I would listen to on the radio as I drive around the back roads in Turkey. In fact, it's the only thing you can listen to on the radio when you drive around the back roads of Turkey. All right. If we can go here to the next slide, let me just click the down arrow. Great. This briefing that I'm going to give here is sort of a quick overview. I'll get into the weeds on a few issues, especially perhaps what's going on in Turkey in the last 2 months, kind of give you a sense of where that's heading. But it's really supposed to provoke questions, so I'm looking forward to you asking questions later in the Q&A period. As Les said, I'm the commercial attaché here in Turkey. One of the things that's interesting, not on my bio, is my last posting was in the U.S. mission to EU, and in many ways the Turkish market emulates very much an EU market. It is sort of the 28th EU member state when you're talking about business. Politically, it's a whole different ballgame, but they have copied so many EU laws that you have a lot of opportunities in Turkey if you're really exporting to EU. We in Turkey have a staff of about 17. It depends on how you count, 1 or 2 of them. There are 4 officers. 2 of them are in Istanbul, 2 are in Ankara. I'm one of those. We have 3 offices, so Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. In addition to the 4 officers in 13 cities, we've got about 8 or 9 specialists. These are our local staff who know the sectors very well. So the sectors that you are familiar with, they're the ones who have been here for years, and I think most of them have been around since for at least a decade. And they're really the institutional knowledge. Folks like me parachute in and out and do what we can. But without our local specialists, I don't know where we would be. I like to throw this map of Turkey up first always because Turkey is very much defined by where it's located on the map, perhaps more so than many other countries in the world. I know a lot of countries will say they're in the center of everything or they bridge everything. Turkey doesn't say that very much because, frankly, it does. It's the quintessential bridge country. It straddles all the way from Europe. As I said, it's essentially a member of the EU in terms of how its business regulations work. And all the way on the other side, we're neighboring up with countries such as Iran and Iraq, and it's squarely in what you might call the Middle East camp. That means that everything that goes on in at least 3 continents probably has some impact on Turkey. And it's been challenging for Turkey, I think, over the last 100 years to sort of navigate those waters. But in many respects, it's a success story of the 20th century that it survived politically. And in the 21st century, Turkey's been an economic success story, which I think has often been overlooked just because it isn't the size of a Brazil or a China or an India. There's 75 million people in Turkey, so it's a little smaller than some of the top-tier markets. But it's had growth rates in the last decade, which are phenomenal. It's slowed down a bit in the last couple of years, but it weathered the economic turmoil starting in 2008, 2009 reasonably well compared to many other countries. And if we could, let's see, click here to the next slide to get to Yes, the 30,000 foot. Sorry, we don't want to get down to 20,000 feet just yet. 30,000 feet. Here we go. As I was saying, Turkey is a country in rapid transformation. If you've been to Turkey 10 years ago, you probably don't know the Turkey that I'm living in right now. In fact, I had been to Turkey 10 years ago on a couple of business trips, and I was shocked to see how much it had changed in the amount of time. Turkey's a huge country. It stretches all the way from Washington to St. Louis, basically, if it was laid on the U.S. map, and it's about the size of Texas. So if you've seen a place in Turkey, you've only seen a place in Turkey. You haven't seen the whole thing. And Istanbul is sort of like New York of Turkey, so there's a lot more to it. And really a lot of the transformation is occurring outside of Istanbul. The transformation is going to make a difference for Turkey in the future. With this transformation, it hasn't been without its ups and downs, and I think the events of the last 2 months have definitely demonstrated that. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. I like the next point, that Turkey is the most eastern country in the West, the most western country in the East. That is entirely true. You can be in the Middle East, and then 3 blocks later you can be in Europe, and that'll happen in Ankara to me on a regular basis. And I don't know many places in the world that have such a mixture. And it's not a veneer of it. It's genuine. There are people here who are entirely European, and there are individuals who are pretty much Middle Eastern, and they live next door to each other. It's always shocking how the country can keep it all together. On the political side, I mean, until recently, the ruling party has been in charge for over a decade, pretty much, and they've had some. There's been some vociferous opposition to them, but not organized, and so they've basically been able to run the show. And even to their detractors, I think they will admit that it's not necessarily a bad thing. The party has been laser focused on trying to improve the economy, knowing that that's how they're probably going to win votes in the long run, and that's been beneficial to the overall Turkish economy. We'll talk about how much the growth has been in a moment, but it's just been incredible. The next elections aren't until the 2014-2015 period, and given the amount of opposition we've seen on the streets in Turkey recently, they could be contentious, and we might see a change in power. But that isn't always a bad thing after a decade. There's a real dynamic in Turkey with the old and new money. If you looked at a map of wealth in Turkey over the 20th century, it's probably all going to end up, all the dollars or Turkish lira would end up in Istanbul, and largely on the west side of the country, maybe Izmir on the coast there as well. But that's changing, and there's a lot of new money in Turkey coming out of Central Anatolia. There are a lot of new entrepreneurs who've built up sizable businesses, sometimes with strong ties to the Turkish government, but they're earning it, the old-fashioned way, 1 lira at a time, and they're creating a lot of wealth in places that haven't had it before. It's making a difference in a lot of the country that is in the central part of the country that until now has been sort of an economic backwater with most of the activity in the West. We're seeing creeping ever so east. Now, it hasn't reached all the way to the border areas in the southeast and the east, closer to Iran and Iraq, but there are promising signs with a peace agreement with the Kurds that could potentially open up that area of Turkey to economic development as well, and that holds a lot of promise for the future. Turkey has tried to maintain a zero-problem foreign policy with its neighbors. That was going really well until about 2009, and ever since the Arab Spring and a couple incidents with Israel, it's been increasingly difficult for Turkey to have a zero-problem foreign policy. In fact, now it probably only has problems with its neighbors, not necessarily through any fault of its own. I mean, it's a very challenging neighborhood that Turkey exists in, as you saw on the map. So it's just something. It's not so much an issue for exporting, except to know that a lot of events that are taking place on Turkey's borders do have an impact. What's going on in Syria, even what's going on in Egypt, certainly what goes on in Iran and what goes on in Iraq will have an economic impact on Turkey. They've been able to navigate through it, but I wouldn't call it zero problem anymore. The good news for U.S. companies is that Turkey has a long strategic alliance with the United States. It's been a NATO member since nearly the beginning. And while there have been crests and troughs in the relationship, it's been a linchpin to the U.S.-NATO strategic alliance strategy. So Turkey's been an essential country. It is the second largest army in NATO, and actually is a very large market for defense and security equipment. that kind of stems from its NATO membership. And so generally speaking, Americans are welcomed in Turkey. They may not always like our policies, but I have to say that as an American, anytime people ask me where I'm from, and that is always the first question they ask you here, when you tell them they're American, you 9 times out of 10 get a smile. So that's a good sign for American exporters. I think sometimes we're seen as a counterbalance to what is often seen as European company domination of the Turkish market, and there is certainly a lot of that stemming from its customs union with the EU. If we can go down to 20,000 feet, a little closer, and some more stats in the weeds here, Turkey's goal, its overriding goal, the current government, and probably the next one, no matter whose party it is to become a member of the G10 by 2023. That will be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the modern Turkish Republic. And honestly, that's a very ambitious goal. I'm not sure if they can achieve it because they have to edge out a few countries like India to get there. But certainly, if you look at what they've done in the last 10 years, if they're even doing half as well in the next 10 years, they've got a good chance of getting close. And I mean, not many countries' economies have tripled in the last decade. So now it's nearly $1 trillion economy. The growth in 2011 in the depths of what you would call the worldwide recession for most countries was 8%. They sort of had a soft landing in 2012, a 3.5% growth, and we're looking at maybe 3 to 5% over the next few years. So comparatively, if you're looking at a quasi-EU member state with 3 to 5% growth, that is, I would argue, a very good market. Per capita GDP just recently crossed the $10,000 mark. That's usually pretty important. We're having a consumer class that has grown up out of nothing, essentially, in the last 2 or 3 years. The malls are everywhere, and everything that comes with it. That means all the infrastructure, all the roads that have to be built, all the distribution channels, everything that has to go to satisfy the needs of this growing consumer class is being created right now. So I liken it a lot to what I saw when I lived in the Czech Republic and Central and Eastern Europe in the 90s, that out of nowhere comes just this tremendous amount of development. And if you're lucky as an American company, you can tap into some part of that with what you're selling. It is increasingly an export-oriented economy in Turkey. I think that Turkey was relatively isolationist for a long time. They then sort of hitched themselves with Europe for a while, and the current government is looking to expand its reach everywhere else. Certainly with Turkey being a bridge geographically to a lot of markets, the Turkish economy is now exporting more broadly. So throughout the Gulf region, North Africa, we're seeing Turkish companies making inroads into East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and certainly, of course, all the Turkic countries in Central Asia, which are starting to take off because of the oil money there. And you could say, well, I don't really care, John. That sounds like competition to me. But really, what that means is that if you can get yourself hitched to the right sort of Turkish partner here, they may open up a whole wide range of markets that expand beyond Turkey. And one of our talking points that we use here frequently is don't think of Turkey as the Turkish market. Think of Turkey as getting married to a Turkish partner who can then open up a whole wide range of markets that you might not be ready to explore yet, but which they're totally prepared to. Turks are not afraid to go into places that most American companies have difficulty going into. And they have the same religion. Linguistically, often they have the skills, whether they speak Arabic or not. Often the Turkic language gets them far. So it's something to keep in mind. Turkey, until very recently, was looking like it was going to have investment grade rating by 3 rating agencies, and that all happened right before the events in Istanbul in June and in July, and it remains to be seen whether or not the investment agencies are going to maybe downgrade or hold steady or do wait and see, or whether the third Standard & Poor's is going to come up. I don't know, and say they're going to put Turkish debt on investment grade. We'll see, but at least there's 2, and that's opening up a wide range of opportunities for the Turkish economy, and that institutional investors might start pouring money in, which will create yet more wealth and potentially and yet more development and then more growth. It's going to be a challenge for them to manage it all. Turkey has a very young, dynamic workforce. It has a very well-educated workforce that's generally good for you if you're trying to find employees here, if you ever try to invest in Turkey. And the purchasing power probably can't be overstated. Just because we've reached the 10,000 per capita GDP mark, it doesn't mean that everybody has $10,000 income. Really, when you're looking at the big cities, so Ankara, Izmir, Istanbul, there's large concentrations of wealth, and per capita GDP there is much higher. It's more on line with what you would find in Czech Republic, Slovenia, Portugal, Greece. So you have and if you add up the populations of those three largest cities, you're talking about 25, 30 million people. So it's in itself that wealthy class in Turkey, the wealthy middle class, is quite sizable. And it's something I see a lot of U.S. companies, including franchises, try to come in here because there is enough wealth to justify it in larger cities. As I said, continued efforts to accede to the European Union, but you never know. Turkey's been a bridesmaid for 40 years to the European Union, really, if you want to go back to the earliest days. And I think it may be tired of waiting at the doorstep, hoping that the EU will say yes. And certainly other countries are getting ahead of the queue. I mean, Croatia just made it. They're talking to Serbia. And I think sometimes this is a little bit insulting to Turkey. However, you can ignore politics in the private sector for the most part on this issue because from my experience working in the EU, 80% of commercial law in the EU is at the EU level at this point. And I would say that at least 50 to 60% of that is the case in Turkey, especially if you're selling products. CE marking is the law of the land here. All of the waste recycling legislation's in place here as well. So, I mean, in terms of product certification, you're essentially following the same procedures. And if you've got your CE mark, theoretically, you should have access to the entire Turkish market, just like you do to the entire European market. The reality is, at the border, there can sometimes be hiccups, and Turkish customs doesn't always appreciate that a product coming from the U.S. with a CE mark is the same thing as a product coming from France with the same mark. But we've heard assurances, actually, from the Ministry of Economy in the last few weeks that the laws have changed. As of July, anything that's been into Europe and has free circulation there should be able to go into Turkey without any questions. There still may be a few questions if you're coming directly from the United States. However, the law's on your side, and that's what our office is here for, to help. We can certainly intermediate with the customs authority if necessary and try to resolve issues if you run into them. The major infrastructure bill, I've referenced this already. This is a big deal. Every road is being built right now. Highways are being built. Express trains are being built. Airports are being built, literally like one a year. Perhaps the largest airport in the world is soon to be built in Istanbul if they can get it off the ground, and the tenders have already been completed for the prime. So it's on target to happen. We're talking a $6 to $10 billion deal, maybe more. And they're building bridges across large bodies of water that always needed them, they never got around to. So a lot of this is happening at once. There's some questions about how to pay for it, certainly as the exchange rate worsens a bit, as interest rates in general worldwide increase. The cost of borrowing one more Turkish lira has just gone up, and I do worry a little bit where they're going to get the financing, because a lot of this cannot be financed from Turkish resources alone. They have to get financing from outside. But we have not seen any slow up at all. There have been no indications from the Turkish government that they're going to walk away from any projects yet. And I think most people are just taking a wait-and-see attitude to see what the fall brings on a lot of these larger infrastructure projects. So we could go to the 10,000 foot. Great. So as I said, the exchange rate's worsening. We were looking at 1.8 to the dollar, and it was very stable for a very long time. The events in the last 2 months, not just the protests on the streets, but some macroeconomic events worldwide have worsened the Turkish exchange rate. I've heard something today in the press that said that they were looking at it maybe getting worse by another 15% potentially over the next few years. That has serious implications for the Turkish economy, and I hope it doesn't happen. But for now, we're looking at it hopefully holding steady at 1.9 to the dollar range, which would be, about a drop of about 10% off of what it was, meaning stability. One thing I'd like to mention is that if you come to the Turkish market, you don't just have us in the commercial service office trying to help you find a partner here and do business. an increased emphasis overall between the U.S. and Turkish governments to increase trade and investment. If you look at our trade, it's about $20 billion a year, a little bit off that in the last year. And if you look at the investment, it's in the $10 billion range, $15 billion range U.S. investment in Turkey. These numbers are much lower than they probably should be. And it just reflects the fact that the market hasn't caught up to what the growth in the Turkish economy has been over the last decade. And that point was recognized by the president when he first came out to Turkey in 2009. And so we've set up a series of dialogues to do what we can, strong G2G and B2B, so government business efforts to increase U.S.-Turkish trade investment. Not just here, we're not just helping you find a partner and get into the market. We're also, with our friends in the State Department Economic Section, talking to the Turkish government on a regular basis on how to reduce barriers to investment and getting rid of problems like the customs issue on the border with CE marking, to try to increase the flow of trade by kind of knocking down forests rather than one tree at a time. And we've had some success. Something I'll talk about in a second when we get to the last slide is maybe going to incentivize the Turks to work a little harder towards reducing barriers. That's this big free trade agreement we're currently trying to negotiate with the EU. As I said, we had record trade in 2011, 20 billion, 19.9, whatever, it was close to 20 billion. That is a huge increase. If you go back 10 years ago, it's something like a five-fold increase of the U.S. exports. We have a trade surplus with Turkey. We're approximately 2 times higher in U.S. exports to Turkey than Turkish exports to the United States. The point they bring up a lot, and we commiserate with them a little bit and talk about how we're trying to increase trade. But truthfully, I'm very happy. It's nice to see that the U.S. products are coming into the market and we're being very successful. And we'd love to help you be part of that. Right now, I think we're looking at maybe overall trade being about the $18 billion range, but it's sort of plateaued after peaking in 2011, kind of holding steady around 19 billion. So there's still healthy trade going on. And the last point I'd like to make at the 10,000-foot level is that you are not alone. Come to Turkey, and there's another 1,200 companies here. U.S. companies already doing business, registered here, not just selling to Turkey. So there's a large U.S. presence, mostly focused on the western part of the country. It's where most people set up shop. Usually getting involved with a Turkish partner. I like to say you have to get married if you want to do business in Turkey over the long run. The Turks like it that way, and you'll have more success. So this is not trailblazing territory necessarily, but there's a well-trodden path that you can follow. We also have 2 active chambers of commerce, maybe a wealth of them. There's American Business Federation Turkey, and then there's the Turkish American Business Association. They somewhat interchangeable. Perhaps one has slightly more American companies as a percentage of the overall membership than the other, but both are active, and both of them we work with here. And you can use them as resources if you do business in Turkey. All right, if we get down to this, I promise is our last slide, and we go to Q&A. I just want to break it down real quick here. If we can go back over the highlights, the strengths and weaknesses. Strengths, political stability, the economy's been growing, continues to. They think big here. They're very ambitious. I got to respect that as an American, thinking big. And they've been able to reach their goals so far. The domestic consumption is reaching a tipping point where they have a stronger consumer class, a lot of deeper pockets to buy stuff that you hopefully want to sell them. And we have a long-standing partnership with them, with Turkey, which means that U.S. is generally positively received. On the weaknesses side, you can only have a successful string of wins for so long, and political instability in the last 2 months is certainly, it's perceived, and in some respects it's real. There are fractures in Turkish society which have been held together, which sometimes come up to the open, as we saw in June. It's not in Egypt, it's not in Libya, it's not in Syria. We had protests here for an entire month, and unfortunately 3 people died. But given the scale of what was going on, and given that there were people with firearms on their waists the whole time, I say that's a strong testament to the relative stability of Turkey. And that if you talk to a lot of Turks, they'll say the police were very mean, but they had guns and they didn't use them, and that's a big difference to what you see in other parts of this part of the world. So I take that as a positive development in some respects. The regional tensions and that Turkey has to face. The fact that the EU market is not doing particularly well hurts Turkey's ability to export, hurts its economy, but at some point the EU's got to turn itself around, so we'll see. Foreign direct investment is still very low, and we're looking, we talk to U.S. companies all the time about investing in Turkey, and it should be higher, it needs to be higher for the Turkish economy to get to this next level. And finally, on the weakness side, Turkey is still relatively unknown to U.S. firms, which I'm always shocked. I guess I didn't even know about Turkey as much before I knew I was coming out here. People think they know Turkey, but they probably don't. Opportunities. The number one opportunity, and I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about this, is the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. For U.S. companies, this may be difficult for the Turkish economy, but for U.S. companies, this presents a tremendous opportunity. To the extent that we open up trade with Europe, and to the extent that Turkey has a customs union with Europe and emulates EU regulatory regimes, this presents a tremendous opportunity for U.S. companies to export to Turkey. It should get easier to export to Turkey. This is something that's actually driving them a little bit crazy because they're seeing the EU do more trade deals with larger economies, and they have sort of a one-way street. The dynamic exists today. Once you have your CE mark and you can get into Turkey, Turks have to get their product certified a whole different way to get into the U.S. market. So that it's gonna make that dynamic more in favor of U.S. companies. Turkey is a great platform for regional strategies, and we do have a lot of U.S. government resources, such as Exim Bank and TDA, that you can work with to try to get into the Turkish market. And finally, on the threat side, we have to talk about TTIP, this Transatlantic Trade Agreement, and Gezi Park events. That's what the instability in Istanbul in July and in June. So far, it's all been kept under control. Everybody went on vacation. Things have simmered down a bit. We'll see what happens when we come back in September. The events in Egypt do not necessarily help. Turkey was closely allied with the Morsi government in Egypt. It's been a bit of a blow to their foreign policy strategy that Egypt is now not so much as much of an ally as it was before. That all plays into economic reality as well. There were a lot of Turkish companies invested in Egypt, and they had to shut down factories and kind of soft pedal things, soft pedal their operations. So we'll see about the regional instability, how much it impacts instability of the Turkish political economy, and whether or not that has impacts on the private sector. EU accession talks go on forever. We'll never know if they're going to get anywhere. I do not have the sense that the EU really wants Turkey to be a full-fledged member. Whether or not they cut a deal to be some sort of semi-member, we'll see. And finally, what happens when the instability impacts the ability for Turkey to pay for all their key infrastructure projects, things which are really driving a sizable part of the economy? We don't know. And I think we'll have to see. I think this fall will be a pivotal period. I would argue that Turkey is an incredibly good market for any SME that's going into it, even large companies, for a whole host of reasons. The threats and the weaknesses potentially could diminish the opportunities, but I still think the opportunities outweigh the threats at this point, no matter what happens this fall. Now with that, I don't want to talk too long. We go to the last slide. I think it says, "Thank you, John Fay." It has my email address. You're always welcome to send me an email any time with a question. And if I don't know the answer to it, I'm happy to pass it on to whoever on our staff can do it. With that, Les, should we go to questions?
Thank you, John. At this time, I'd like to invite Josh back to lead the question and answer portion of this program. Josh, do we have any questions?
We certainly do. We have a few questions for John. One of the first questions is that you had, John, you had mentioned the opportunities regarding transportation and logistics overall in the country. Are there specific, in addition to that, are there specific sectors that are really booming that you would see are a great fit for American firms?
Sure. I think that if you have any business in road building, in rail building, in bridge building, or in actually even building distribution centers, all of those things are being built at a very quick pace here. And even if you don't necessarily have a direct role in it, I would say that's not a bad thing. If you have a technology which, you're not building roads, but you got something that can be used on the side of a road, or a traffic management system. These sorts of things are desperately needed, and in some respects it's better not to be providing a prime contract solution, because frankly you can't get that easily unless you have a close Turkish partner and you're behaving as a Turkish company. I mean, it's not that you have to be Turkish to win these contracts. You do have to have, though, a Turkish nature to your bid to win the larger tenders from the government. However, when you get down to the subprime and the sub-subprime, especially when you're looking at something like the airport, the infrastructure needs are more specific, and you've got just a niche technology. Great, that's where you would want to contact our office, and we're always trying to fit you in into the conversations about, well, when the private sector is buying something that they need to provide a solution to the government. So yeah, I don't know, maybe that answers that question.
Okay, great. And one other question appears very related to that is, Turkey is a NATO member, as you had mentioned. Are there opportunities to sell equipment to NATO? It's for the Turkish market.
Yes. Well, NATO procurement's a kind of a funny thing in that, NATO doesn't really necessarily buy anything, and I learned all this when I was in Brussels, maybe you already know, but NATO sort of sets the standards, and then all the countries, the ministries of defense, are responsible for adhering to whatever NATO said they were going to buy to, and they just kind of go out and procure locally. In Turkey, the defense procurement side is big business, and they're buying billions every year, not necessarily all from the United States. It's a kind of a funny procurement model that they use. The Ministry of Defense itself does not actually have a heck of a lot of say anymore, even though they're the ones using the final end product. There is an intermediary procurement agency called SSM, which stands for something in Turkish, but it's basically the Defense Procurement Agency. They are more closely affiliated with the government, and anybody who wants to sell to the Turkish military probably needs to get an audience with them to get a sense of what they need. But if you have a specific technology that could be used in the safety and security environment or the defense environment, we have an excellent defense, aerospace, and actually safety security specialists here who can give you a sense of, oh yeah, I know the Turkish government needs this because we talk to them all the time. And then we can try to get you into the right decision makers. It's not a direct road on defense procurement in Turkey. You have to take this route through this defense procurement agency, but it's an agency we work with very, very closely.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Here's a very interesting question as well. It's regarding women in the business community, being that that Turkey is predominantly a Muslim country and a conservative country at that. Is it a consideration for women business people, persons to be successful in Turkey?
That's actually a really good question, because I think my answer will hopefully dispel what might be a preconceived notion about Turkey. I'm not going to try to pretend that Turkey doesn't have a strong conservative element to its society. It does, but the 80 or so years of militant secularism in Turkey has created something very different than what you might see in a lot of other parts of the Muslim world. There are a large number of successful women business leaders in Turkey. There probably could be more, and I won't try to pretend it isn't a somewhat patriarchal society and somewhat male-dominated. Yeah, that's true, and that's kind of true in a lot of the world. But you will find a lot of women in high-ranking positions in business here, and I don't think it's necessarily an impediment for a woman to want to do business in Turkey. The fact that she is a woman. There's a very strong feminist streak among women who are successful in Turkey, and women who are secular in Turkey. They are almost the most militantly secular of any parts of society. And a lot of the protests that you saw in Istanbul in June were originated by the strong militant feminist component of society. Women who know that they have significant rights in this Muslim nation and do not want it to encroach upon them in any way, even in ways which we might find in the United States to be just sort of a multicultural expression, like women allowed to wear veils in public and private life, or in having public office and wearing a veil, or adhering to some sort of Muslim tenet or belief, publicly. something that we would take for granted in the United States you'd be allowed to do in Turkey, that is sometimes seen as provocative. It's very interesting.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Can you talk about the differences of doing business within Istanbul to, say, Ankara and Eastern Turkey, in terms of culture?
Sure. That's actually another very good question. You know, Eastern Turkey is an interesting region. The question is, where does it really begin? I mean, I'd say that many Turks who live in Ankara think it begins east of Ankara. If you live in Istanbul, it probably begins about 3 miles east of Istanbul, because for you that nothing else matters. Doing business in Istanbul, and I don't actually, you know, my office is in Ankara, but my understanding from talking to my colleagues there is that doing business in Istanbul sounds a lot like doing business in a place like Greece, maybe Bulgaria, Romania. Not that the cultures are the same, but in terms of the way of doing business, it's just a slightly more Eastern ethic to it. So there's a little more of a old boys network, perhaps, which of course in Turkey can mean old girls network too. And there is a more Eastern philosophy to the way, you know, people like to take time a little bit. There's a little more slowness in how you develop relationships, and developing a relationship is extraordinarily important. You know that on Eastern Turkey, it's essentially the same thing, it's just more pronounced. Okay, so as you move farther east, that Eastern ethic kind of blends more into the way that people do business. So networks are very important. Making money is not always seen as the end goal. Time is not something that is seen as being finite and not be equaling money. So you just sort of have to have perhaps more patience and more patience to get to know the people that you're doing business with, because they will expect to get to know you as you move farther east in Turkey. And frankly, you know, when you get to the far east in Turkey, it can be challenging. It can be as challenging as it is to do business, I suppose, in northern Iraq, even more so in some respects, because it is a very remote, isolated part of the world that has its own rhythm to doing business. However, I will mention this. The line between West and East Turkey is continuously moving, and there has been evolution. Certainly in Ankara, it's no Istanbul, but it is in Ankara what Ankara was 10, 15 years ago. And that ethic, which is sort of an Istanbulian ethic, is now starting to pervade other larger cities in central Anatolia. So you're seeing a general progression of the time, and the speed that it's with which it's happening is probably faster. I mean, you know, within a generation, an entire city can change dramatically from backwater to capital of a region with very strong economic fundamentals and a very Western business ethic. Oh, one last point. As you move farther east, you're not going to find any English. The English line probably ends pretty much on the coast of Turkey and in Istanbul and its environs. Even in Ankara, there are a number of people who don't speak English particularly well, which is still surprising to me, frankly.
Okay, John. Well, thank you again for your time. Do you have any additional parting thoughts?
Sure. If I can hit on my 2 big points. One, remember, if you want to do business in Turkey, you got to get married. So, and that's where our office comes in. We're very good at linking American companies up with solid Turkish partners that you can trust. And 2, don't forget, it's not Turkey you're exporting to. If you're doing it right, you're going to try to get the good partner to export to an entire region of Central Asia, the Gulf, North Africa, and who knows where else, using your solid Turkish partner. But it's a market you can tackle, and I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Josh and John. This concludes this program with the reminder to watch our other videos in this series, and feel free to contact the U.S. Commercial Service for any further information. Contact information can be found off the main page of export.gov. Near the top of the page is a tab for locations. Select domestic or international to find your local office. Thank you.